In the spring of 2014, James Atfield, a 33-year-old father of five, was known as a kind, friendly, and cheerful person who loved any opportunity to sing karaoke. He had been working hard to rebuild his life after a tragic accident 4 years earlier, when he was hit by a car. The accident had left him in a coma for 8 weeks, and when he finally woke up, he had suffered brain damage and severe mobility issues. His entire world had changed overnight. Despite these challenges, James was determined to regain control of his life. He dedicated himself to rehabilitation, pushing himself every day to improve. He eventually moved into semi-sheltered accommodation in Colchester, where he was able to regain his independence and reconnect with the things he loved. After arranging it with his ex-partner Cheryl, Jim was said to have an emotional reunion with his children in a matter of days. It had been several years since he had lost contact with them, which was extremely painful for everyone, but given the work he had done and the time that had passed, it would be an understatement to say that he and Cheryl were excited for him to see them all again. On Friday, March 28, 2014, Jim spent the evening having drinks at the River Large Pub, one of his local bars, arriving just before 6 p.m. He left sometime before 1 a.m. and traveled to Castle Park, a shortcut through to his house. He lay down on the grass and began to fall asleep when a man approached him and inquired if he was okay. Jim said that although he was indeed intoxicated, he was just taking a moment to sober himself and have a cigarette. At 5:45 a.m., the guy said, "You want to be careful, mate," and then proceeded down the trail. When emergency personnel arrived at Castle Park, a homeowner saw Jim on the grass, covered in blood and barely alive. According to authorities, he fought for a further 45 minutes before being declared dead when he arrived at the hospital. It was rather startling for them to see how severely he had been assaulted. According to one officer, Jim was so covered in blood that at first he was unable to distinguish the color of his skin or hair. It was all red. About a meter from his corpse, a bloody shoe print was discovered. Other tracks were discovered beyond that, indicating the path his murderer or killers took. Jim was stabbed a startling 102 times throughout his body, including in his skull and eye, according to an autopsy. His hands and arms were covered in wounds, indicating that he had attempted self-defense and retaliated against his assailant. They knew the killing had to have taken place between 1 a.m. and 5:45 a.m., since the witness from approximately 1 a.m. was the only one who seemed to have seen or interacted with him, but he was ruled out as being involved. The investigating team already had their job cut out for them. It was not only a decent few hours, but it was early in the morning in a dark park with trees and shrubs all around. The River Lodge pub's CCTV footage showed Jim removing his jacket and sitting down at the bar by himself, chatting with the staff. Nothing appeared amiss or out of place, and when he left, it appeared to be a fairly normal Friday night. Since no one followed him out, it seemed unlikely that his killer had been inside with him. According to his mother, the assault was completely arbitrary. He would never have chosen to argue with others or gotten himself into any type of difficulty since he was such a kind guy. There was nothing hostile about him. Another camera close to one of Castle Park's gates was available to investigators, and it captured many persons arriving and departing between late in the evening and 4:20 a.m. The police urged all 23 individuals on the video to come forward after releasing these photos to the media. At least they could have their identities cleared, but at best they hoped someone would recall seeing anything. The Metropolitan Police and reinforcements from all throughout East Anglia boosted the number of uniformed police in the region. Approximately 3,000 personal alarms were sent to those who felt unprotected and afraid. Everyone was tense. In the hopes of generating some leads, the popular UK TV show Crime Watch discussed Jim's case in an episode. However, this did not happen, and 3 months later, when the investigation into Jim's murder was still ongoing and it seemed like the community was returning to normal, a second body was discovered under suspiciously similar circumstances. On the morning of Tuesday, June 17, 2014, Ned Almana, then 31 years old, was pursuing her doctorate at the University of Essex. She had gathered her schoolwork and left her dorm room to go to a lecture on campus. At 10:30 a.m., she had been embracing university life and excelling in her academics. She was following the pay. Although Brook Trail is quieter, it gets to her building much faster. She often sees students or people walking their dogs along it. A guy from the neighborhood went out looking for his missing cat 10 minutes later, when he and his companion accidentally bumped over her corpse on the ground. Her face was shattered to pieces, he said, with one eye protruding from its socket and the other severely swelled. Within minutes, paramedics and police arrived, but there was nothing they could do. She had escaped being pursued and approached from behind, had been repeatedly stabbed in the back, and, like Jim, had been instantly overpowered by her killer. She had been stabbed in both eyes and had fallen to the ground with such force that her skull was cracked. Ned had only been in Britain since the beginning of the year, moving from Saudi Arabia to Colchester to live with her brother, who was also enrolled in a PhD program and was enjoying her English language course. She was scheduled to graduate in August, and she and her brother would regularly took the same route to her campus along the remote footpath, but on Tuesdays her brother started lectures early, so she would enter alone. She was praised by Richard Barnard, the president of the university's International Academy, who described her as a modest, diligent, and industrious student. According to her brother, the funeral was enormous and everyone back home was afflicted with sadness. In addition to the fact that she had been dressed in traditional Islamic garb, authorities said that they were considering the possibility that the murder was motivated by race or religion. Although he did not think her death was a hate crime, a fellow student expressed his fear about a possible serial murderer in the neighborhood. It could have been the incorrect time and location if the assault was connected to Jim's death. It's not an extreme or racist individual if you look at the two situations. He said that it seemed to be a gang, a serial murderer, or a psychopath operating in the area, although it was difficult to determine if her death was related to Jim's murder 3 months before. Authorities said that they weren't ruling it out. According to Essex Police DCS Warren, there were clear parallels between the killings. Since this kind of assault is quite uncommon, we are still open-minded about the characteristics of the criminal or offenders and whether or not the two murder investigations are connected. An EIT was released along with a description of a young Caucasian male, approximately 18 to 25 years old, medium but dark-haired, wearing a red long-sleeve jacket with the hood up and dark trousers. After more tip-offs, they released a picture of a yellowy tan jacket and the gray, yellow, and black bag. He said that they were being treated as separate but parallel investigations, which was different from Jim's case, but at least this time they had a few witnesses. On that particular day, Ned was transporting over 100 Bedfordshire police officers. In addition to National Crime Agency profilers, the inquiry now included Cambridge, Shire, Hertfordshire, Kent, Norfolk, and Suffolk. A reward of up to £20,000 was also being offered by Crime Stoppers to anybody who could give helpful information. Nearly 300 houses were knocked on, neighbors were questioned, and the house she formerly occupied with her brother was completely demolished. In connection with the murder, a 52-year-old male was detained but promptly freed, and 2 weeks later, police also talked with a 15-year-old. 70 persons with a history of knife crime were interviewed, including him. Colchester Academy was where the 15-year-old was enrolled. He had been found guilty of criminal damage to a residence in 2013 and was under a supervision order from the juvenile court for stealing a store at knife point in January 2014. Although he claimed to have been at home when the murder occurred, he was interrogated with his mother. They returned to Square without asking any further questions about him. Police interrogated about 900 persons over the course of nearly a year, but the investigations proceeded slowly and with little progress. They had discovered no clothes, no murder weapons, and, to be honest, no hints whatsoever. There was very little forensic or tangible evidence from the murder places, even after months of searching every inch of those waterways and forested regions. Given the frantic nature of the assaults, it was probable that the murderer had been wearing gloves and had taken great care to hide their footprints. Michelle Sadler's phone was finally answered by 999 on May 26, 2015. Nayhead was discovered close to the Sally Brook Trail, where Michelle had been taking her dog for a stroll. Around 10:30 a.m., she grew worried about someone's suspicious conduct and called the police. A teenage kid standing by himself on a little wooden footbridge over the creek had met her gaze. He was peering, being sly, and scanning the area carefully. He frightened her right away, and the more she watched, the more alarmed she became. In addition to his thick, dark-rimmed spectacles and what seemed to be gardening gloves, he was dressed in a yellowish-brown jacket. After turning around, she rushed back down the road and ran into another woman. To check whether he was still there, they made the decision to return together. Instead of being on the bridge, he was now crouched behind a tree, looking around. "Hello, I'm wondering if you can help me," Michelle asked over the 999 phone. "It's a rather remote spot, and there's a pretty suspicious person hanging about there. It's also clearly a dog track, and he's alone himself. He's wearing a jacket that looks a lot like the one that was all over the paper and everything, and it's on the same path as what occurred over a year ago. I may be mistaken, but I'm not sure. But something doesn't seem right." 10 minutes later, PC Loomis, who happened to be nearby, came up to the teenager and inquired about his well-being. He said to the cops that he wasn't feeling well and that he was simply taking a stroll to get his mind straightened out. PC Loomis saw the bulky jacket and gloves, which seemed a little strange on a hot day. He inquired as to if he had anything that he should be aware of. The youngster acknowledged carrying a big flip knife. They arrested him. James Fairweather, 16, was the adolescent, whom they had spoken with just 2 weeks before to Nahed's murder. After he claimed to have been at home when the murder occurred, the 15-year-old child was freed without being questioned further. In his interview, he revealed more than the police could have ever imagined, even though they were only interested in the knife. Ames Fairweather killed Jim and Ned, but they were unaware that they had already interviewed a double murderer. As they watched him leave, he spoke calmly and honestly about the voices in his head telling him to kill people. A dive into James's devices revealed that he was obsessed with serial killers, particularly the Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe and Ted Bundy, of whom he kept pictures on his phone. He claimed that reading about them turned him on, and he spent a lot of time researching Ian Huntley and Myra Hindley. He also looked up a man who had killed multiple elderly victims and had entered a diminished responsibility plea, suggesting that he had already been preparing how he would handle this if he was caught. James claimed that on the night of March 28th, while his parents were sleeping, he heard voices growing louder and more overwhelming. He grabbed a large knife, put on some gloves, and slipped out of his house through a downstairs window. He was now on the hunt for someone to kill and wanted to make his twisted fantasies a deadly reality. He walked around for a while before entering Castle Park, which was about a mile from his house, and he came across Jim Atfield on the grass. He claimed that he paused for a minute to see if he stirred, but he was lying on his back, pasted out. James claimed that he went into a rage and only came out when he heard Jim making a gurgling sound and realized he was dying. He then saw a light coming from somewhere and feared someone was going to find him. He got in at around 2:30 a.m. after running home. Jim had been struggling for his life for at least 3 hours by the time they discovered him. It's rather difficult to consider this in light of his horrific injuries. The next day, James cleaned the knife before discarding it into the river, placed his blood-stained clothing in a bin bag, and left it outside to be picked up along with the rest of the trash from the street. He said that the account of how he came to assault and kill Nayhead was quite similar. A voice in his mind said, "They shall not see evil," as soon as he saw her. James said that in order to stab her in the eye, he deliberately turned her around and removed her sunglasses. She would have been safe if she hadn't chosen to travel there by herself, he continued icily. Given that there was a killer at large, why would she ever do that? I said. James said that throughout the 11 months prior to his arrest, he considered murdering someone else every day. He said that the voices in his brain were ordering him to hurl acid in his head teacher's face, burn newborns, rape someone, and remove the tongues of sex workers. He would spend his days playing video games and viewing violent pornography to help silence the voices. He acknowledged that he didn't lay low because he wanted to cease murdering, but rather because he knew the police were investigating everything. Although James was a little saddened by the killings, he said that it was the correct thing to do since they had sinned. Additionally, he was often looking for updates and placing newspaper clippings into a plastic folder since he found such excitement in seeing things unfold in the media. James Fairweather was arrested and charged with murder after making a startling confession. Because he was too young to be identified, James was admitted to a secure hospital for examinations while the judicial processes began. James was contending that he was experiencing psychosis with his defense team. James said that he was not in his own body or mind and that he had no control over it, that the voices in his brain had taken over. This was before he was presented with the DNA evidence that connected him, at which point he admitted partial involvement for the murders. James Fairweather contested both charges of murder, but entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of manslaughter on the basis of diminished culpability. This was quickly rejected by the prosecution, and after several expert reviews, a date for a murder trial was established. According to his defense team, he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder by 4 psychiatrists. His attorney claimed that James was a 15-year-old boy who was experiencing what I would like to call the perfect storm of autism, growing social isolation, and paranoia that resulted in psychosis and ultimately led to his murder. However, the judge quickly dismissed this claim, stating that it would not be a sufficient defense. It would be an unfair and unjustified slur on them to suggest that autism predisposes someone to commit acts of serious violence, he added, adding that many individuals of various ages have autism. The judge went on to say that the killings were heartbreaking and cruel in ways that were difficult to comprehend. James spoke about how his spectacles and ears caused him to be teased at school. His dyslexia caused him to suffer at work, and he never fully healed from his grandmother's death. School sources described him as a thug who kicked and headbutted others, claiming that his conduct had become more aggressive as he grew older. He might also be evaluated by the prosecution's own specialists. The assertions were similar to what you could see in a horror movie, Dr. Philip Joseph told the court. He always uses voices as an excuse to disassociate himself from his past actions. He did not discover any signs of psychosis. James's visual and oral hallucinations were deemed very implausible by Dr. Joseph. Depending on whether the voices were internal or external, James would shift their source. There had been no consistency in any of the stories. Additionally, Dr. Joseph brought up James's police interview, in which he calmly and clearly laid out everything that had transpired without hesitation. In addition to being able to recall everything, there was clear premeditation behind both killings rather than an external force. According to another psychiatrist's testimony, James had shared with him some of the most aggressive and antisocial ideas they had ever heard in their whole careers. In April 2016, the now 17-year-old was unanimously found guilty, which also automatically carries a minimum term of 12 years due to his age. After the penalty was decided, his name was also eventually made public. I turned to the mitigating factors, the court instructed. There could be 2. The first is that you had a mental illness or impairment that reduced your level of culpability even if it did not provide you a defense of diminished responsibility. It wasn't until you were moved to the medium security facility, where you have remained a patient, that your autism was identified. I acknowledge that your compulsive conduct, which may have partially fueled your fascination with serial murderers, would have been influenced by your autism. Although I take it into consideration, I do not believe that the combination of autism and the developing psychopathic personality condition you were experiencing significantly lessened your guilt. Your age is the second mitigating factor. When the first murder occurred, you were 15 years and 7 months old. And when the second murder occurred, you were 15 years and 10 months old. Naturally, your age is somewhat taken into consideration around the 12-year mark, but it's safe to say that you fall somewhere in the lower end of the 14 to 18 age range. Generally speaking, the age of criminal liability is 14. It is too soon to predict the course of your developing psychopathic personality disorder. A devoted and supportive family is behind you. Your father is here in court today on behalf of your family, as is your mother, who was there throughout the trial. This situation is tragic as well. He then imposed 2 life sentences with a minimum of 27 years on James Fairweather. He will be on license for the remainder of his life if he is ever freed, which means he will be bound by terms and conditions and might be sent back to jail at any point if they are not followed. His mother sat and wept as he was taken away. But James showed no reaction at all. For a moment he turned around, mouthed, "Don't give a," and shrugged. He attempted to appeal the sentence during the trial on the basis of his age, but this was denied since it was believed that the judge had already taken all relevant factors into account. What may have occurred if Michelle hadn't contacted the police that day is a mystery. "People have told me I saved lives, but I think I saved my own life," she added. "I believe he was anticipating me being his 3rd victim. When Michelle, the person who had reported and apprehended him, was denied any of the prize money because she had called the police instead of the anonymous hotline first, the community was devastated. As a token of appreciation, the residents gave her some money. That day, according to many experts, a serial murderer in the making was halted. James said that he wanted to commit murder once again. He admitted to authorities that he would have murdered at least 15 more people if he hadn't been apprehended. The investigation team said that they would always remember Jim's and Ned's situations. Jim was the epitome of a person who never gave up, even in the face of difficulties that might have easily driven someone to a very dark place. Jim had spent 4 years reconstructing his life. Ned was excited to graduate and begin the rest of her life since she liked her institution and was meeting wonderful friends. Despite the terrible circumstances that took their lives, their family hope that people will never forget them for the very strong, compassionate, and driven individuals they were. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you want to help us support our channel and keep creating content. We really appreciate it, and it really helps us.